I get a lot of questions from people about sewing on knits. So here are some tips just to help you with sewing knits. Number one, you want to use a ballpoint needle. The needle that comes standard in most sewing machines is a universal needle, and they will sew a lot of knits, but a much better needle to use is a ballpoint needle. They come in a package just like any others. And actually, if you look at the needles, they look just like the universal needle that came in your machine. The difference in them you really can't see, but it's that the tip is rounded and it just sews through knits better. And for most knits, you would use a ballpoint needle size 80 or 90. For very fine or lightweight knits, you would use a size 70. The second tip is to reduce the pressure a little bit. So turn that pressure dial on the top, just back it off a little bit so the pressure is not quite as much. Instead of a straight stitch, you want to use a narrow zigzag stitch. And by narrow, I mean maybe 1 millimeter wide. And your stitch length could be, 2 to 3 millimeters long, but that narrow zigzag stitch will stretch with the fabric, which a straight stitch will not. And then sometimes, if your knit is particularly stubborn and wants to bunch up as it's sewing, you might use some tissue paper or water-soluble stabilizer on top and underneath the fabric where the stitching is going to be. So water-soluble stabilizer, it's called Hydromelt or other names, depends on the brand, but it's a film. It's a lightweight film that looks kind of like this. And I would just cut it in strips, like so. And I'll show you how I would use it when I'm sewing on knits. I use it especially if I'm putting hems in knits, but sometimes you would need it for the seam lines also. So here I am at the sewing machine, and I've set it for a zigzag stitch, and I've set my stitch length to about 2.5, and up here the width selector, I've set the width on 1, and I've already inserted my ballpoint needle. I also backed off my pressure so it's a little less than 2. So I'm putting my fabric, 2 layers of fabric underneath the machine. Put the foot down and start to sew. And I'm going to guide it with both hands and keep my hands at the sides so that I'm kind of slightly pulling out to the sides so that it doesn't bunch up in front of the foot. And there's my seam, and it will stretch with the fabric. Let me demonstrate that again because I think I had my hands kind of in the way for you to see what was going on. Put the camera in front of the foot this time. Remember to always stop with the needle in the high position. And there's my seam. So those times when I might, if it's bunching up and it's not going to lay flat, if I'm going to use the water-soluble stabilizer, I would cut strips of it and just put the strip on top and maybe another one underneath. So I've made a sandwich of stabilizer, knit, and stabilizer. and the stabilizer will just tear away. Or you can just cut it close to the stitching, and because it's water soluble, it's going to wash out when you throw the garment in the washing machine. So good luck. Use those tips to sew knits, and I think you'll have very good results.